Welcome, everybody. My name is Ben Dudley. I'm the Director of Mainers for Clean Energy Jobs. We're a coalition of businesses, professional associations, labor unions, and environmental leaders formed to advocate in support of the New England Clean Energy Connect. I want to thank our co-sponsors, Hydro-Québec, for helping us pull together this presentation today. The presentation will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave the last 20 minutes for Q&A. When that time comes, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your questions, and I will go through the questions in the order that I receive them. I'm going to get us started here right away with an introduction of our presenters. Julie Barlow grew up in Ancaster, Ontario, and Jean-Benoît Nadeau in Sherbrooke, Quebec. The couple met in late 1980s at McGill University in Montreal. After graduating, both worked as freelance journalists, published widely in Canada's national magazines in English and French, and then they got married. Nadeau and Barlow have spoken to audiences across Canada, the US, in Europe, and Japan. Their work has appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, the International Herald Tribune, France's L'Express, the Courrier International, and more. Together and separately, they have published 10 books, written over 1,000 articles, and won more than 30 journalism and literary awards. Avid travelers, Barlow and Nadeau lived in Paris, where Nadeau was a fellow at the Washington-based Institute for Current World Affairs, Toronto, and Phoenix, Arizona, where Barlow was a Fulbright scholar at Arizona State University. Nadeau and Barlow are regular contributors to Canada's main national public affairs magazine, L'Actualité. Welcome, Julie and Jean-Benoît, and thank you for the presentation today.
Thank you. Well, and I guess it's up to me to start. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be able to address you on the topic of Hydro-Québec. I mean, we wrote an entire book on it, but since we published, we have had the occasion to speak about it a couple of times. But it's the first time with an American public. We've done a number of articles on energy before writing the book, and what we can contribute here is a journalist's view on the ground, informed but not scholarly on Hydro-Québec. The following will be something like what the Japanese would call a discovery report, a fresh eye report, things that were cause of wonder to us. So we will address questions of the socio-economic importance of Hydro-Québec in Quebec, its strong culture of innovation. We'll talk about its desire to move forward for regional integration. But before Julie and I address these 3 points, I'm going to start with a more general view. And what actually I'm going to tell you is things, Julie and I, but is things that often will surprise Quebecers themselves, who tend to take Hydro-Québec for granted and rarely stop to consider the big picture. The thing that struck us when we were researching Hydro-Québec from the start is that it's quite different from any utility. It's a radically different animal. And it keeps hitting us every time, every which way we looked, financially, technically, structurally. First of all, it is very big. Electricity is a kind of finicky thing, not even a substance, but it's a finicky thing to produce, to carry, to distribute. And since the liberalization of the mid-1990s, most utilities got rid of either production, transport, or distribution to concentrate on one or two, but not the three. Not so Hydro-Québec. Their core business remains production, transport, and distribution. And it controls everything fully on its territory. Allow me to put some elements of a PowerPoint for a couple of minutes. Forgive me for the quality of my PowerPoint. I remain an amateur regarding that. But Hydro-Québec is big physically. Whoops, sorry. I'm sorry.
There we go.
Okay. So Hydro-Québec at a glance, this is the map of Quebec with power lines and the dams that are more than 245 megawatts. There's 63 power generating stations, but here you have about 25, 30. Hydro-Québec produces 38,000 megawatts, which is enormous. It transports 38,000 megawatts and it distributes 38,000 megawatts. It's energy. In energy, this is roughly 200 terawatt hours per year, and this amounts to the consumption of New England, New York State, and Ontario combined on a territory that is as big as the Atlantic front, all the way to Virginia. It's and roughly 12 to 15% of that production also feeds neighboring states and provinces. And by all account, it's a very big producer. It's the fifth largest energy producer. Quebec is the fifth largest energy producer behind China, Brazil, United States, Russia, but before India, Norway, or Japan. It's by far the largest electricity producer among US states and Canadian provinces. It's almost twice the size of Florida Power and Light. It's second in revenue before Pacific Gas and Electric. Its rates are the lowest on the continent. It ranks fifth for the number of customers. So it's like enormous. The other surprising fact is how stable Hydro-Québec has been historically. Unlike any other big utility, it never approached bankruptcy. It's never needed a cent of subsidy or bailout. It has been a government-owned utility, public utility from the start, and has remained so. But since 1980, it's a commercial company that must produce a profit. Profit is about 20% of gross revenue, and it amounts to 10% return on capital. Very few companies have that kind of record. And when you consider the history of Hydro-Québec over 76 years, the surprising fact actually is that it never made a bad decision that put it in danger and that threatened its core business. And in fact, most of the decisions it took, some more adventurous, actually improved the business considerably, as we will see. Another oddity about Hydro-Québec is that it's been going full hydro for 70 years. It tried a bit of nuclear, a bit of power, thermal power, but not much, and it got rid of those. And in the 1960s, actually, in the 1960s, when the common view amongst engineers was that nuclear was the future and thermal was the future, Hydro-Québec said, no, we're going to go hydro and we're going to go big. To give you an idea of scale, I mean, it's visible from space. On the right, you see the crater of the Manicouagan River on the North Shore. It's a crater, it's a meteoritic crater. It's that system is one of the large ones that feed Hydro-Québec. The arrow that you see at the bottom corner is the dam that you see on the left. That's the Manic 5 dam. It's as high as at the highest point it is as high as the Olympic Tower in Montreal. And the little black arrow that you see on the left is a bus, a tourist bus of people who visit the installation. So Hydro-Québec did that kind of work. And not all dams are as big, but it went that way. But although we associate Hydro-Québec with very large dams, its actual originality is transport. In the 1960s, Hydro-Québec literally invented a new mode of transportation for electricity, which is called very high voltage power lines, or 735,000 volt, or 735 kilovolt. And this is the backbone of Hydro-Québec. The chart I'm showing you there is it explains how many lines you need to carry the electricity from the Manicouagan-Outard station that I just showed you, well, system of dams that I just showed you. And if you use, for example, 315 kilovolt, which was the standard of 1960, you needed to carry all the electricity there, 23 power lines. And if you jumped to 735, you needed only 4 power lines. So Hydro-Québec, because of that choice, because of the fact that it chose that mode of transportation, was capable of developing a system of energy that allowed the company to go get energy very, very far and sell it very, very far, because it was capable to have a lot less power lines for the amount of energy it needed to carry, which dispensed it from having to build nuclear stations or thermal power plants close to consumption centers. I mentioned earlier that early Hydro-Québec was exceptionally big, but the reason fundamentally is that it got a very strong transportation backbone. Sorry, I repeated myself because my notes, I improvised a little bit too much. But this very strong backbone explains the other oddity of Hydro-Québec, which I didn't mention yet, is that it's 100%, its energy is 100% renewable, or nearly 100%. This is because Hydro-Québec could afford to go full hydro, and there are no utilities on the continent that approach this record, except maybe BC Hydro, which is at about 80% renewable. And this record, this capacity, explains why Hydro-Québec could do a first transition in energy in Quebec as early as the 1970s, when it transitioned home heating from oil heating or bunker fuel to full electric home heating, which means that Quebec has an overall record of energy consumption of 50% renewable overall, which is something that even the greenest places like California, Ontario, or Vermont can hope to achieve in a generation or two. And Quebec is capable of doing that because of the technology it chose and because of the size of the Hydro-Québec. Which brings me to the last oddity. Because of all these choices, Hydro-Québec has had to learn to cope with tremendous demand and strain on its network. For our book, we were allowed access to the Hydro-Québec's command center downtown Montreal. We could not write the exact location because it's a strategic asset that has to be kept secret, but it's a bunker. It's completely autonomous in water, energy supply, even air. And there are 100 people working there, but it all boils down to 3 people and who do everything to start turbines and stop them according to available capacity. And the reason why this is a challenge is this chart that I'm showing to you. On the right column is the peak demand in winter, 38,300 about megawatt. And the middle column is the average, 21,000. And the left column is the bottom of the year at Saint Jean-Baptiste holiday. And so Hydro-Québec has to deal with tremendous, because it chose to heat houses electrically, it has to deal with tremendous variations daily, especially in winter. And it has to deal with tremendous variations of demand yearly. And this requires an extremely robust system and extremely capable transporter and distributor in order to accommodate that. So that is what Hydro-Québec is. Julie.
Yeah, it was one of our biggest surprises. I mean, to understand really what was at stake for really what the challenges are for a hydroelectric company. And I'll explain a little bit more in the socio-economic highlights the things that so these again are things that sort of stood out to us when we were writing the book. Most Quebecers are not really aware, of what Jean-Benoît just explained, because Hydro-Québec has always had and will always have, we think, a sort of communication problem. And it's not it's not that it's particularly bad at communication. It's just that hydro is really hard to understand. It's probably fair, we think, to say that Hydro-Québec is in some ways a victim of its own success. It succeeded, as Jean was just explaining, it succeeded in making this transition in the 1970s. With the result that over 80% of Quebec homes went from heating with oil or gas to hydro heating. That means people have huge electric bills, and it's kind of a source of misunderstanding among Quebecers. A Mainer may say we're just guessing like $100 for electricity and then maybe $200 a month for heating or gas in winter, yeah. And in Quebec, this is all concentrated in one bill, which would be like, in your case, if using those figures, $300. So, that there's a difference between the price of gas and the amount you spend on gas by driving. And Quebecers sometimes confuse the actual rate of electricity, which is very low in Quebec, of course, with the amount we pay, which is that we pay for a lot of electricity because we use so much of it. So this is one of the things that is a challenge, and we were surprised. And so, part of the book was trying to explain, to demystify these kinds of challenges, I guess. One drawback of cheap electricity is that Quebecers have also become huge electricity hogs, like among the most wasteful people in electricity continent. None of us are proud of that, but it's a result of having very, very abundant, stable electrical supply and people aren't even aware of that. We lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and experienced brownouts, and these don't happen in Quebec, and they can't for reasons that I'll explain in a few minutes. So Hydro-Québec ends up having to manage this sort of paradoxical situation of people complaining about electricity bills while consuming and wasting energy because of cheap electricity. It's also fair to say that Quebecers tend to see Hydro-Quebec's decisions as arbitrary, and we went to a lot of pain writing this book to explain why they're not. There's a certain amount of mistrust, I would say, as well, for reasons that I don't think have anything in particular to do with hydro per se. But it's mostly, again, a result of the misconception or maybe lack of understanding of what electricity is. This is not a problem that's exclusive to Hydro-Québec. Electricity is a very esoteric form of energy. You can't touch it or smell it or feel it or even see it. It can only be described using mathematical formulas. So, people are pretty averse to that sort of thing. The result is most people don't understand some of the sort of fundamental concepts about it, like the significance of peak power, peak period use, which Jean alluded to earlier. People don't understand that using electricity differently, spreading out the use evenly, will really have an impact on future decisions about the country, about the country the company has to make. We really went to great lengths in the book to explain this. What I think that one thing Quebecers do understand well, however, is that Hydro-Québec does contribute to the public good. It is very profitable, as Jean mentioned, and supplying a couple $2 billion every year that go towards financing schools, roads, healthcare, libraries, public services. At times, people, when they get into this complaint about fees, people mix up things like when Hydro-Québec announces a new export contract, journalists even will say, why aren't our rates falling? And the reason is that Hydro-Québec produces dividends that go towards paying for public good in Quebec. It's a problem that I think it's not a model people question, but maybe there's some issues around whether or not they understand exactly how it works. The reliance of Quebecers both on electricity and on Hydro-Québec's contribution to public finances mean it is literally too big to fail, and it hasn't failed, but one of the reasons is it can't. What people may not know is that the high standards of maintenance and performance the company respects, they may not know that much about this. We dug into this a fair bit. Hydro-Québec is constantly upgrading or repairing to the tune of a couple $2 billion a year. When you have 80% of a population of 8 million who spend 8 or 9 months of the year, in the cold. People who depend on hydroelectricity for heating. Being good for Hydro-Québec is literally a life and death issue. All the more so since we have commitments to neighboring networks as well. I'm saying Quebec, Hydro-Québec. Unlike, again, what I mentioned, unlike what people have experienced in California, you don't see brownouts in Quebec. You don't see forest fires that are due to, failure to maintain lines on Hydro-Québec's part, which doesn't mean that the lines are perfectly maintained, but, very well. The company has never gone bankrupt again and never even come close to it. Good maintenance and a good balance sheet are vital necessities, not just economic imperatives in Quebec. This is probably one reason Quebec, nobody has never seriously really questioned Hydro-Quebec's basic economic model. There was a time when Quebecers are proud of it as a national project of the dam building in Quebec and so on. And it's interesting because there's a shift going on now. Hydro-Québec is not building dams right now. And people are a little, maybe the public is a little bit lost. There was once this sort of eager beaver mentality about building dams. And the Hydro-Québec has a reputation for that, but that's not where the company is now at all. The company, Quebecers on the whole resist the idea of building more dams, and so does Hydro-Québec on the whole. It's going about progress and future development in a completely different way, which I'll explain about more in a minute. Hydro-Québec has been under a lot of scrutiny inside Quebec, notably for its entire environmental record. And that's since the 1960s or the 1970s. There's nothing new, it's more intense, but there's nothing new. There's no denying the choices it made for energy sources and transport have had an obvious impact on the landscape. There's no denying that dams have an impact on wildlife and on nature. Yet study after study we discovered has just demonstrated that the overall impact of hydroelectric dams, particularly on CO2 production, is neutral, basically neutral. The dams transform nature, there's no doubt about it, more than they destroy it. Reservoirs do produce a spike in CO2 production when they are flooded. And this peters out and becomes normal. Most of, like a large majority of the experts we consulted on this agreed on this, that it peters out in a couple of years when CO2 emissions return to normal, before building. So Jean just put up a chart showing,
This shows the types of energy.
Right.
There's no clean energy, and they all produce some CO2.
Yeah.
So this is a chart that gives the grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour of energy produced. And on the right is the coal at 872 grams per kilowatt hour. And hydro is somewhere between 6 and 17. It's a combination of these two values, depending whether the electricity is produced from a power generating station that has an annual or multi-annual reservoir, or to the left, a run of the river power without a big reservoir.
So this is the kind of chart that, when we hear about environmental groups protesting and continuing to protest, and completely legitimately, there's no doubt about it. But you still want to show them like the difference between CO2 emissions from gas or oil and from electricity, and even compared to solar and wind energy. Hydro-Québec, as you can see, hydroelectricity compares very well. So it's interesting to sort of see the big picture.
If I could interrupt, I'm sorry, Julie. Well, was that life cycle analysis? Is that the data from CRAG?
Yes, that's exactly the data.
So that's analysis over a 100-year period, right?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
I don't know exactly, but I think it includes building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the case of some dams, indeed, it means nearly a century.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, please.
No problem.
No problem.
So, on the whole, it's surprising, having written this book now, to listen to environmental criticism of Hydro-Québec. Again, it's legitimate, but sometimes we feel like people are missing the big picture. Hydro-Québec has, we discovered was one of the first companies in North America, definitely in Canada, to put in place impact assessment studies, in the late 60s, early 70s. So there's nothing new about it, and the systems and the processes and certainly the employees are there working on it. There's no, the perception can sometimes be that it's barging blindly into projects, but that's not at all the case. So I'm going to speak a little bit. I know we're running a little bit behind on our time. I'm going to speak a little bit about the culture of innovation at Hydro-Québec, which was again something that we were really kind of surprised, kind of impressed by. Although we'd both written on this earlier. Hydro-Québec is the only utility on the continent that still has its own in-house research campus, which Sean will show you in a second. In the US, I understand it's the federal government that does research for hydro utilities. Hydro-Québec does its own all in-house. And it does research that is of quality that it sells to outside clients, including the US Army recently for a new type of 5-volt battery. So this is the,
Yeah, sorry.
Anyways, but we visited the research thing. You can see on the picture here, it's this big black square, kind of creepy looking, just outside of Montreal and towards Sorel. It looks like a monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's a Faraday cage that insulates the inside from external electromagnetic effects. So this is where a lot of research is carried out, and other companies like Westinghouse uses it to test pacemakers, the effect of magnetic fields on pacemakers. When we got inside, we felt like we were in a James Bond movie. It was really fun. There was all these things that look like huge fancy toys. So we walked around. You can see some pictures. These ones are not, brand new, but I'll speak about the one on the right a little bit, which I believe is the Line Ranger. Yeah.
Yes, it's a Line Ranger.
The research center was created 50 years ago. It's not new, for Hydro-Québec's core businesses, again, production, distribution, transport. Hydro-Québec needed to master the new high voltage technology it created, which Jean was describing, the 735 kilovolt line. And while this is now mastered, IREC, the center, it's the acronym for the center, does simulations and develops protocols because network management is now automated for Hydro-Québec. So this means that they have to ensure safety. It's a big priority to make sure the lines work and the safety measures are in place. Because of the nature of electrical power, Hydro-Québec needs to have safeguards in place to be able to react to events that can happen 1,000 miles away at the sources, at the stations. And these need to be able to react to these things in 1/1000th of a second in order to avoid cascades that can end up in blackouts. I mean, the stakes are really high. System management has been fully automated by fiber optic cables and in-house telecom systems for many decades now. We thought the robot and the drone section was really kind of cool. When we visited it, the researchers were working on the Line Ranger, which is what you see, the thing on the lines.
The thing on the right.
They can travel along 25 kilometers of high power lines in a day and perform simple repairs in addition to inspection tasks. They're also working on a drone at the time. I don't know if it's operating now. A drone that can land on high voltage lines, then do inspection and even do repair. So this is very state-of-the-art technology that's being developed here. They were testing new features on a remote control mini sub too. That was cool. We felt like we were in Austin, which inspects bottoms of dams and various conduits. So as you can see, all the research is being done. A lot of the focus is being done to find ways to prevent strain on the network. And it's not because there is, strain per se, there's always strain on networks. The idea is to reduce peak period demand so the company can make better use of its present generating facilities and not have to build more, and ultimately delay major infrastructure projects like dams. So the thinking at Hydro-Québec is that the main challenge is not whether or enough it has enough energy to supply demand, because it does. The key issue is to cut power use during peak periods so that it won't have to build and it will have ultimately more surplus.
Yeah, displacing it.
Place the period, yeah. So to do this, Hydro-Québec realized it had to not work just on the network itself and on the cool things in the picture, but also on the other side of the meter, what we call the other side of the meter, which is people's consumption habits. So that's a big focus that's going on in the company now. We have at least one chapter on it in the book. This has been a big focus. Basically, they're working on ways to and these periods, which are the periods where everybody gets up and takes a shower together in the morning, takes a shower together. I didn't say that. Everybody takes their showers at the same time. Everybody basically does the same thing, does the laundry and at the same time. So you have these very strong demands on the system day in, day out. And if Hydro-Québec can find a way to shift the use of hydro in different places, parts of the day, then it'll free up a lot of energy. So the images you're seeing now are the houses on the left. You see these are like experimental houses that were set up in Shawinigan. Hydro's job, Hilo, yes.
Is this new subsidiary?
Yeah. Hilo is a new subsidiary. Its job is to get clients to consume energy differently. So until recently, conventional thinking was to tell people they could save energy by not heating at night and starting heating when they get, not heating at night and starting heating when they get up. So save energy by heating at night. But Hydro-Québec realized with research, among other things in these houses, that that's backwards because it puts enormous strain on the network still at the peak period uses first thing in the morning when everybody gets up at, basically the same hour. Everyone turns the heating, the light, the radio, the showers, they run the water heaters and they run appliances pretty much in synchro. The solution is preheating, as it turns out, which is that you heat the house sufficiently a couple hours before people get up and then reduce power when they actually get up. But in order to manage this, you need, of course, thermostats that are intelligent and a whole system to manage that kind of service, from lighting to water heaters, and now, of course, electric car charging stations, which will be used more frequently in years to come. So this is what Hilo, this new subsidiary, is doing. It's looking into using electric cars in both directions, so people can use electricity to charge them, and then the batteries can also be used to boost the system, the electric network, when it's needed, which is another way of reducing peak demand. Hilo will also install systems of solar panels combined with batteries, and there's lots of other things coming. More ideas will come from other experiments being carried out in management of micro networks, like one that they are developing in Lac Mégantic, which is kind of close to Maine. Also in the remote Inuit community of Quactac, which we wrote about on the northern tip of Quebec near Baffin Island. In Quactac, Hydro-Québec is studying how to manage a local network using solar panels, batteries, and peak period reduction techniques. And the idea, of course, is to reduce, Quactac's reliance on diesel fuel. It's almost entirely reliant on diesel consumption, but also to use the information about how to manage that type of energy source in order to be able to use it in the rest of the system in Quebec. So the applications will have, the research will have applications in the south.
Mm-hmm. And the pictures that I just showed you, they're called Hilo. Hilo's job will be sell mega batteries. That's another essentially, these are 53-foot long container-sized batteries that can feed up to 40 houses or balance or serve as a backup to a huge windmill or a solar panel farm or backup even a regular transformer. So they're finding right now all sorts of use for these kinds of things. So we're going to close here the section on innovation and talk a little bit about our other finding, which is that the other finding that impressed us about Hydro-Québec is how far they have come into thinking regionally, which we associate with export, I think wrongly. For all sorts of reasons, we tend to think about energy in terms of autarky, electricity in particular, in terms of autarky, self-sufficiency. And it's normal for small new for provinces or states to want to have their own system, but at the same time, for some reasons, we don't reason like this for fuel, for gas, for nuclear power, but for electricity, we reason that way. And well, there are reasons that make sense. I mean, you want electricity is finicky to transport and produce and distribute, and you want something reliable and control, and certain degree of control, but too much control can mean higher prices and less reliability. And these are two problems that Hydro-Québec has always avoided, and which puts it in a position to, this is where it is right now, of thinking outside of its borders. Now, this is not new in the sense that Hydro-Québec was involved regionally a long time ago, even before it was Hydro-Québec. In the time when it was the Montreal Light, Heat and Power, it built a big dam on the St. Lawrence River in Beauharnois. And the main purpose of that dam was actually to sell to Ontario and New York. And today, Hydro-Québec is involved regionally in all sorts of ways through day trading and supply contracts. It supplies a lot of energy, 18% of demand in New Brunswick, 15% all over New England, with as much as 25% in Vermont. Ontario, New York, 4 or 5%. And the Hydro-Québec buys also vast amount of energy from Newfoundland and Churchill Falls. But interestingly, it's considering new ways. For example, in 2009, it considered buying New Brunswick Power. It didn't work for all sorts of reasons. One of them was technical. The big dam on St. John River, the Mactaquac Dam, had problems, too costly. They walked away. Last year, it considered another type of deal with Ontario. It actually said to Ontario, we buy our electricity, and for future projects in Quebec, you're going to be in as a joint venture. If we build a dam, for example, you'll be co-owner of the dam. Since Hydro-Québec is not actually considering a dam project right now, it didn't go far, but that was the thinking. That's in the air. And well, other ideas are circulating. You had the MIT people came to you recently, a while back, to talk to you about firming and balancing and what it means in terms of transforming what we call exports into a two-way street, where Hydro-Québec would not be an exporter, but an importer-exporter, exactly like it does interestingly, it actually does that right now with Ontario. It signed a contract a couple of years back where Ontario sends surpluses to Quebec. It's stored into reservoirs and it's sent back to Ontario at other times. New ways can be explored. Ontario, and this, for example, this new way led me to think that, for now, Hydro-Québec is considering for a new example. Well, in that thinking, it could be conceivable that Maine could get a chunk of production in wind power. It's something that naturally has to be discussed at the level of governor and premier, but I'm surprised that it's something that sounds logical to me and is in the logic of the regional thinking that is being developed right now. So I wish I had some very large, convincing conclusion to give at this stage, grandiose, really grandiose conclusion. But in effect, this is what we present to you is presented to you, and we have not to exceeded too much our time. No. Is a view from the ground, from a journalistic perspective, and I hope that it will be constructive.
There's more information in the book.
Oh, yes.
And I commend to all of you this book, Julie and Jean-Benoît's book. I hope the title is it backwards? Well, you get the idea.
Fine, get the
Children
idea.
had-
Yeah, no, it's not backwards.
Yeah,
to us.
that's good.
Okay. But I've just finished reading it, and it's very impressive, broad and deep overview of Hydro-Québec. Thank you both for the presentation, and let's jump right into questions. We've got a few already in the queue. The first is, you mentioned Quebec consumers' wastefulness in using electricity because of its low price. What is the price per kilowatt hour to households?
Okay. It's in the range, let me remember, it's about, there's two levels of rate. The first 40 kilowatt per day on a monthly basis is about 6 cents a kilowatt. I don't have the
latest.
the
figures,
hundreds. Like it's about 6 cents a kilowatt, and if you consume above the threshold of 40 kilowatt per day on a monthly basis, that means on a month, during a month, it means 1,200 kilowatts. If you go over that, then you go at 9 cents per kilowatt. That second rate is not the cheapest on the continent. When we speak of cheapest rates, it's often the first rate that we consider. But for a family of 4 living in an apartment, that's pretty much it.
And then there are different rates for commercial rates. I don't know the latest on for different kinds of industries as well. I'm writing a paper on greenhouses right now, and the greenhouse industry is trying to get Hydro-Québec, the Régie de l'Énergie, in fact, the government, to reduce the rates for greenhouses so it'll be a more viable industry in the future. From 10 cents to 6 cents.
Yes.
And then some industry leaders are aiming for getting it down to 3 cents a kilowatt hour, which is what they'd like. So,
and it's
the rates are decided. The raises are decided once a year by the Régie, which is an external body. It's not Hydro-Québec itself. That
Energy
decides
board.
It's an energy board, yeah.
But there has been a change recently where the rates are off the energy board for 4 years.
Yeah.
But the government has promised that the energy hikes the rate hikes will not be above inflation.
I'm not sure if we mentioned, I mean, it's written into the law creating Hydro-Québec that it has to supply energy at the lowest cost possible for Quebecers. So, that's one of the reasons that the price hikes, although the overall rate is very low, price hikes are very contentious because it's the law here that they're not allowed to charge any more than they need, and they have to justify that. The company has to justify that. So
yeah.
And I just received a message from our friends at Hydro-Québec confirming what you're saying, that the fee is on average a little over 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So right what you were saying,
Yes, factor
between 6 and 9.
Yeah.
The next question is, can you say a bit more about electricity imports to the Hydro-Québec system? How large are they and where do they come from?
Imports.
yeah,
The main import is Churchill Falls.
Yeah.
Churchill Falls is a gigantic dam that was built jointly by Hydro-Québec and Newfoundland in Labrador, which is about nearly 1,000 kilometers from Montreal.
And I forget the quantity. Do you have?
It's 5,000 megawatts of production. It's enormous. It amounts to about 1/8 of the total capacity of Hydro-Québec, and
the contract
about the same proportion of energy.
The contract is coming up for negotiation, but not for another 20.
2041, 21 years.
Yes.
21 years.
So in 21 years, Quebec will have to think again. Hydro-Québec will have to think again, but who knows what, I mean, it's a...
Well, there's two things there. Hydro-Québec is actually co-owner of that dam up to 33%, nearly a third. And so if the government of Newfoundland wants to charge more for electricity, Hydro-Québec is a net will profit from that hike because it's a co-owner of the dam. Hydro-Québec is I think one of the reasons why it's moving strategically towards reducing aggressively peak demand, and it's just beginning to do that, is precisely for the purpose of being able to have some flexibility in the event that dam either prices go very high,
higher,
or Newfoundland decides that it wants to build a row of aluminum plants along the Churchill River in Labrador in order to use that energy, which is unlikely.
It's important to, I mean, Newfoundland couldn't use the energy if it had all the energy. It needs to be able to export the energy, which is why Hydro-Québec was involved in the project in the first place. But it is a contentious issue.
Yeah. So Hydro-Québec also does buy from other sources. It does have a two-way exchange with Ontario on one contract, and it tends to buy in winter a little bit when it needs a lot of energy, and sell on the spot market in the summer when other jurisdictions start the air conditioning. That's pretty much, it's cyclical that way, but there are exchanges.
Yeah, we visited, there's a trading floor with day trading on electricity that we visited, we describe in the book, and things happen wherever, and Hydro-Québec bids for sending energy to wherever they happen. I can't remember, what were the latest, anyway, all over the
energy is an extremely weird thing that you cannot demand must equal production at all times, which means that if you have a lot of nuclear stations in Ontario, for example, and you have a lot of wind at certain hours when you have not much demand, you have too much production. You cannot stop a nuclear station, so you have too much electricity with respect to the demand that you have. And so they actually pay to get rid of that. It's called negative prices in trade. So at those hours, Hydro-Québec buys because it has reservoirs. And if the line is open, it will buy the power and store it in reservoirs and sell it on other days.
Thank you. The next question is, will you talk a bit about Hydro-Québec's relations with the various First Nations in Quebec and how those have developed over time? We hear a lot about problems in relations between the parties. Is that your sense?
That's your topic. Go ahead.
Okay. Historically, it was there was a lot of problem with the issue of the James Bay and the Cree, but they came to an understanding. Hydro-Québec and the Cree and the Inuit and the Naskapi, which are near Labrador, came to an understanding. So there's a James Bay Convention. Overall, Hydro-Québec has negotiated about 40. I must say Hydro-Québec and the Quebec government. It's not always just Hydro-Québec. Is part of 40 deals with various indigenous nations in Quebec. So it's naturally. It depends on the degree of organization of each nation. For example, the Cree, and as well as the Inuit, created a united government or council, or the Grand Council of the Cree, in order to deal on an even foot with the government, instead of having each community deal with the government.
Like a united voice.
A united voice, a united political voice. And whereas, for example, the Innu on the North Shore of Quebec, which is where the Manicouagan River is, for example, for all sorts of reasons, were not capable or could not get that kind of council going. Mm-hmm. And so in those cases, Hydro-Québec has had to deal piecemeal with every group involved for every project.
I would just add, like, in the terms of that and environmental questions, everything, what's amazing is, like, it's really complex and there's a lot of different variables going on. And Hydro-Québec has to deal with different situations and different types of needs and problems from geographic area to geographic area to different, from group to group. in Quacktack, in the Inuit development that we mentioned about earlier, Hydro-Québec has to deal with the fact that the local industry is dependent on diesel fuel, selling diesel fuel. Like, it's going to take people's jobs away if Hydro-Québec builds solar capacity for the thing. And so, I mean, there's all these individual problems. It's painted with a broad stroke, Hydro-Québec's relationship with Indigenous people, but it's complex from group to group, from area to area, and from type of problem to type of problem. I mean, it's really and I don't know, I don't remember the number of staff they have working on issues, but it's very, it's obviously the company's very active and engaged in dealing with those problems as they come up and negotiating solutions as they come up.
I think that, for example, there was a controversy about 2 years ago regarding a windmill project in the North Shore concerning the Innu. Yeah. The government decided not to go for it.
Yeah.
And there was a controversy because the Innu said, we want our project. But right now,
for job creation,
and for revenue,
sure,
for the communities involved. But right now, the Quebec government is starting to relaunch the standard process for wind production, and as promised, these guys are the first in line for the first contract.
But it's on hold.
Yes, but it's clear that they will be the first benefactor of the first contract.
Yeah.
So
it's a complex picture.
Yes, 11 nations, all autonomous, and some of these nations are united, and some are not.
Yeah.
And also,
that's what's so striking to me. Sorry to interrupt. What's so striking to me about opposition groups that are opposed to the New England Clean Energy Connect speak of the First Nations tribes in Quebec as if they are one entity.
Yeah.
And it really, it way oversimplifies the complexity between what are many different nations.
Mm-hmm.
For example,
yeah.
Yes.
It's hard to talk about it in any other way and make sense of it because it really is complex. But I agree, it's a big problem.
Interestingly enough, when Hydro-Québec was created, and I'm not saying that this is right by far, but in natives in Canada didn't have the right to vote before 1950. Hydro-Québec was created in 1944. A lot of present dams of Hydro-Québec were actually built by companies that existed before Hydro-Québec, and that built those dams at a time when natives had actually not even the right to hire a lawyer. Okay, this was Canadian law. And a long way. We have the Canadians have gone a long way in addressing recognition of natives as persons. I mean, this must be, and Hydro-Québec, when Hydro-Québec announced James Bay in 1971, it had been 3 years that natives had gained the right to vote in Quebec. Imagine, imagine the and I'm not excusing that situation, but I'm just showing how far and from how low we came on that question and how rapidly. And in a matter of a couple of years, Hydro-Québec and the Quebec government and the federal government were capable of doing a first deal with the Cree and the Inuit. And that has been sort of a blueprint of all the other deals that came after that. But this is true that a lot of the dams that were built north of Shawinigan by Shawinigan Power before Shawinigan Power was nationalized in 1962, these dams were built in a context of absolutely no consideration for the natives. And Hydro-Québec, because it bought Shawinigan Power in 1962, is actually an inheritor of that history. But it didn't make it in that case. Oh, we do not hear you.
Sorry, I put myself on mute so I wouldn't be a distraction, and lo and behold. We got a question, can we get a copy of the greenhouse gas emissions chart that you shared? And I did send a link out.
Okay.
So you should all see that in the answered question section, and I'll be sure to send an email out as well.
Okay.
The next question on the list is, how can I convince detractors that 100% of the power for the NECEC line will be surplus from existing dams? The NECEC is the contract with Massachusetts delivering power to New England.
Yeah.
Well, it's because they're not building new dams right now, so it's that simple.
Yeah, it's kind of that simple. What? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, opposition groups are making the case that Hydro-Québec is going to shift energy from other export markets and send it to New England. And I'll let you respond to that, but I will say that as part of the PUC's analysis of the project, they hired London Economics International to review the project, and one of the things they looked into was this very question. And so there's an impartial conclusion as part of the PUC process that spells this out very clearly that that this is not a concern. But it's what we're hearing from opposition is this sort of, they call it the shell game argument. They're going to just take it from another export market and deliver it to New England, and there wouldn't be a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
I think this is a question you'd need to address directly to Hydro-Québec. I don't think we're in a position to answer that.
Well,
I mean,
if Hydro-Québec has contracts elsewhere, it certainly is not going to remove the energy from those contracts and put it somewhere else. I mean, for the same reason that it will not remove the power from it would send to Massachusetts to send it to New York State.
Yes, and I will say we did do a previous webinar back in, gosh, I guess June, with Gary Sutherland and Monsieur Vezina from Hydro-Québec, and they've addressed this issue directly, and that we have that on YouTube, and I'll be sure to share that link on YouTube of them addressing this very specific question. I'm looking at the time, and if people will be patient, I want to take one more question. Thank you all. If Hydro-Québec capacity becomes stressed, are there limits or constraints on Hydro-Québec simply importing fossil fuel power? This is a concern amongst some Hydro-Québec, that Hydro-Québec would simply substitute power sent to New England by shifting power from other markets and purchasing, well, substitute power from fossil fuels. I guess we've just addressed this question actually, but I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about it.
Yeah.
Well, Hydro-Québec is the Quebec government is very, very committed to zero emissions. And if Hydro-Québec was doing that, you would know, because it would have to buy permits for carbon emissions.
Yeah.
Because we are in a system where companies have to buy carbon tax permit in order to be able to do that kind of thing. So if Hydro-Québec should do that, you would immediately see it.
People would flip out. Yeah.
People would flip out.
People would go crazy.
People would not accept Hydro-Québec to do that.
Well, thank you very much. I know we've gone a couple minutes over the limit. Thank you for your indulgence with us, and thank you to all our participants for sticking with us to hear responses to these great questions. I will follow up on a couple of issues that were brought up in the questions to make sure you all have those responses. I also want to thank Hydro-Québec for their assistance in helping us pull this together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks for the invite.